You're listening to the 14th source for all geeky and nerdy news and discussion, which means that you're listening to a podcast.
For all intents and purposes.
I am D. Bethel.
And I'm Andrew Asplund.
And we are your two overeducated, codependent nerd hosts, bringing you the things that we like to talk about, but filtered through inquisitive and critical lenses in the episode for Friday, January 7th, 2022. Bam! Do you know how we do it, Andrew? We do it by starting a week into the new year, optimistic and excited.
Yeah, you know, we took a week off.
We did. It was warranted. It was good time. Well, you know what? Let's not pull the curtain back too far. It was times.
It was times.
But,
I mean,
time passed, and so did you, I guess.
Well, I mean, no, I didn't.
Well, no, you didn't. No, yeah. Anyway, I was speaking for. I turned in my grades, so technically most of my students did pass.
What Dan is dancing around is the fact that I was in fact had a COVID event in my home. So really, we took the week off just so I could isolate for 2 weeks and deal with the reality of being in COVID lifetime.
And I was nervous because I heard that it could spread through the internet over microphones. So I'm glad I have the pop filter here. That would save my ass.
And it's actually really it is an interesting thing, because it really.
Hold on, you're okay, right?
Yeah, no, I'm okay. I'm okay. At least I seem to be. I mean, who knows, right?
I mean, we've been wondering for a while.
But it's I live in Seattle where right now our COVID cases are shooting up. It is a thing. There are a lot of cases, and there's a certain amount of no one knows what to do.
Right.
As soon as cases start skyrocketing, the CDC says, you know what though, don't stay home too long. So right. It's it is. It is just. We've been doing this podcast for a while, and more just every week it's just wow, we don't even know what the hell's going on, and apparently nor does anyone else.
Right. I mean, talk about the chaos, Andrew. I did my very first drawing of 2022, and what happened? I dated it 2021.
Oh.
Yeah, it was a veritable tragedy. Anyway, let's actually talk this week about auteurs. I know this is a subject we've broached before. That's really so. What do we mean by that? People that have singular visions, creative people that seem to have singular visions that guide their teams, and we can't forget the teams that are involved, to constructing a text, whether it's a film, a video game, music, TV show, whatever.
Well, we say that. You say we can't forget the team,
right?
However, we culturally tend to forget the team.
We do, but here at this show, we do not. And we've talked about them before because they are monolithic presences, they are impactful presences, and they're interesting, and they make interesting stuff, generally speaking. We've talked about Hideo Kojima. We've talked about Joss Whedon. We've talked about, I've talked a lot about, especially on my Long John website, I've talked about my favorite living director, Guillermo del Toro. All these people are kind of are names, and when they make something, their name is attached to it, and a lot of fans are like, "Oh, this is what we want to see." And
it's actually, I think it's interesting is the idea of the auteur. I was reading a little bit about this, and this is all me shooting from the hip, so don't pretend like I'm an expert. But it's this idea that came out of French. It was the French talking about what they saw. It was a French, I think, a discussion of film, and kind of trying to talk about things like people like Alfred Hitchcock. Where you saw this person who seemed to be controlling a lot of the process, and how they're this the qualities of the film can be attributed to them and ostensibly them alone. I guess it's weird because, and we've talked about this quite a bit, actually. I mean, we've talked about auteurs and, showrunners, right, and how there's this tendency to always put the credit or the blame, but more often the credit at the feet of the one person.
Right.
There's an article that was out recently on Bloomberg, and it's about basically an auteur, what we might want to start calling a failed auteur, or at least a currently unsuccessful auteur.
Right. An article written by one Jason Schreier, a very notable video games journalist who spent years at the website Kotaku, of all places. But he's known for doing these really thorough investigative pieces, breaking news stories, and lately, within the last 5 years or so, specifically about workplace environments and specifically crunch environments for video game companies. And this is an article, by him. So he's a name, and he left Kotaku to go to Bloomberg, of all places. I'm like, what? Okay, sure. They must, you know what? The paycheck must be good.
Whatever pays the bills. Most of us are just basically living paycheck to paycheck. I can't really shit on people that like took a bigger paycheck, you know. And he's still, and it's apparently, from what we can see, it's a publication that's letting him do the good work that he's been doing for his entire career. So good on him. So he writes his piece about Ken Levine. I think? Yes. Is that how you say it?
Yes.
You know, he's basically credited with being the guy that motivated a number of games. The one that most people recognize is Bioshock.
Right. He's the Bioshock guy.
Although System Shock 2 is also an important game. And then Bioshock Infinite was the follow-up to Bioshock.
Right. And he's not Bioshock 2.
No, not Bioshock 2. Just Bioshock and Bioshock Infinite. And in how he, after they made Bioshock Infinite in 2013, so that's 8 years ago, basically he was kind of given some authority from the publisher.
Right. And can we say carte blanche? Because it really feels like carte blanche.
Well, what's wild is the article discusses how they basically shut down the studio that made Bioshock. I think Irrational Games.
Right.
And the idea is that he kind of chose a few people to come with him to a new studio, a smaller studio.
Because he felt the studio was getting too big and like he couldn't express himself accurately or something like that. It's weird. It's all in the article, but we're not here to report the news. We're here to comment on it.
But it's wild that like they talk about this idea that, because he was, he was such a creative genius, right? He's given this carte blanche. He basically tells some of the employees like, hey guys, you're going to come with me to the new place. Don't tell anyone else, ha, and then shuts down the studio. Like literally, it says it. Like get everyone else involved and say, hey everyone, raise your hand if you don't have a job. Oh, actually, all you guys raise your hand. They don't run it that way, but that's what it sounds like.
To quote the article, they say that Levine explained to the stunned crowd, because he gathered them all together to tell them that they were out of a job. It was right after the release of Bioshock Infinite, and he said that the development of that game had drained him and that the company had grown too large. Again, I'm quoting from the article here. And he wanted to explore new ideas with a smaller team. And so they shut down Irrational and started up a new studio at with the owner of Irrational Games, Take-Two Entertainment, I believe. And 11 people from the previous studios, all that he kept.
And what's wild is what is that new company? Who knows? They have a name. They haven't produced anything though, so it doesn't really matter.
Right.
And this article discusses how they've basically been, kind of fumble fucking around for 8 years.
Right. Developing stuff and having it tossed out because it didn't meet Levine's standards. At least that's what they're saying in the article.
And it does, and it comes across as that he has like this ultimate authority, and how they're not like, and they're not really producing anything. And honestly, they're not being expected to produce. Like, there's always like, oh, when's the game coming out? Like, oh, we're still working on it. And he's trusted because, because you made Bioshock and Bioshock Infinite. Right. You are the auteur. And I guess the reason why I thought it was interesting to talk about is because it's to the point where I think my distrust of single people being in charge of things has grown over time, right? Mm-hmm. But this is just another kind of like nail in that coffin of like, actually, maybe auteurs aren't actually what we build them up to be. Maybe this is all a big sack of shit,
Maybe, yeah. I take a little bit of a different approach to it because auteurs can produce interesting stuff. Say what you will about the quality of the games produced. Hideo Kojima releases games and he did something very similar. He left Konami, he started a new studio, was basically given a blank check by Sony although it was ultimately the budget was much smaller than what he was working with normally at Konami. And he did release a game called Death Stranding. Again, whether it was good or not, it's up to the player, but it came out, and they're continuing work on whatever comes next. They just released the director's cut, quote unquote, for Death Stranding as well. Apparently it sold well. Good for him. If it works, but I think it speaks to this story that we read for this episode, speaks to, I think, the dangers of auteurs being aware of being auteurs, I should say, because it's reading the article, it seems like Ken Levine got so wrapped up in this idea of him being a genius that it stalled him. Because one of the things that came out is in the article was they were developing this game based on, what do they call it, like narrative Legos or something like that?
No, that's what they say. They say narrative Legos. Look, I own a lot of Lego.
Indeed.
I don't actually know what that means.
How many stories have your blocks told you?
Well, many, but like...
Right.
But...
whatever that means. But apparently it's some sort of concept, because the thing is, being such a perfectionist, it seems like it seems that the gaming industry is outpacing his genius, for lack of a better word, because they talk about a game called Wildermyth, an indie game, a tactical RPG that came out that basically takes that Lego narrative Lego idea that he has been talking about and actually makes good on it. And it's just this small team, just like what he was doing with this company that I should say the company he created post Irrational Games is called Ghost Story. And which
is
wow.
Like, in retrospect, that actually sounds like it's just a con.
That's the most genius thing he's done so far. But we're kind of making fun of it because he hasn't done anything. And we don't do that to diminish his creativity or what he's contributed to video games. Because I know you're a huge especially Bioshock 1 fan, or at least you found it very interesting.
Because I haven't played any other.
You didn't play Infinite?
It's on my list.
Okay. It's interesting. That's the only one I've played.
You know, once it's 20 years old, I'll get to it.
Yeah, right. One of the things the article points out is that he's still like playing games. He's keeping an eye on what's out there, and when he sees something that's cool, he's like, "Oh, we should do that, and we should do this, and see what that game did? That was rad. We should do that." Which to me speaks to someone that's actually behind the wave instead of in front of it. It speaks to a personality defect more than a visionary one.
Well, and I think that's a fair comment. And actually, the article points out that like other people keep beating them to the punch, right? Like that other people keep doing whatever it is they want to do. For me, I think about it. Maybe I move more broadly. And I keep referencing non-video game stuff. I keep thinking about this story of Star Wars, actually. The original film and the whole discussion about the special edition that came out, 97, I think, of A New Hope, and how one of the things was that George Lucas, in releasing that, changed enough of the film and removed the editor's name from it.
Oh, wow.
The editor being his former wife.
Right.
And that spurs discussions about her contribution to the film, where she was, no one ever really talked about her, but that she actually, like, her editing, and nowadays, in a modern context, some people have actually suggested she is what made that movie successful, at least in part, right? Like, no one person is it's the idea that no one person is the sole contributor.
Right.
It's a team, and it's always a team, unless you're writing a novel by yourself. But even nowadays, most novels, you have editors,
yeah.
you have a lot of people involved, or at least some people involved. And I think what for me has really like colored my perspective, and actually I say this with the acknowledgement that you, Dan, yourself are a creator that creates entirely on your own.
Oh, yeah.
So what I say doesn't apply to you, because you go out there, you are an auteur in a sense that you make your own shit and it's good. Oh. You draw it, you write it, you ink it, you letter it, you fucking do everything, right?
Yeah.
But that is rare.
Except sell it.
Just
joking.
But that is rare, right?
Yeah.
And so when we talk about these big projects that involve tens or hundreds or thousands of people,
right.
We instinctively we want to, and I say this like there's a lot of people in Star Wars. But go back to Star Wars. A lot of people that want to give Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni credit. It's like, but it's not just those two. Like it's there's so many people involved. And there's actually people that want to shit on Kathleen Kennedy.
Right.
You know, but it's like, but again, there are so many people involved with all these projects. Like there's no one person that drives anything.
It's the coalescence of a team a team that figures out its voice, perhaps with the heavy hand guided by the auteur in the room, or maybe not.
I mean, I think for me, what I think my perspective is, the auteur I want to see is the person that knows how to build the team. And I think those people do exist.
Yeah.
But it's not Ken Levine, right?
I'm laughing because I thought of an example that is actually too appropriate, because even though he's outspoken, I wouldn't call him an auteur. John Rogers is the example of what you're talking about. And I'm glad I said it instead of you, so that you wouldn't be too much of a stick in the mud in that regard.
But he always talks about he builds teams.
Both on screen and off, yeah.
You know, he builds rooms. No one ever says he's the showrunner.
Right. Or it's his vision, right? Like that's the thing, like with like it's Buffy is Joss Whedon's show. And to the effect that like it was widely reported that like he touched every script before it went to filming.
Is that weird now?
Yeah, it is weird, but still it's still true. But like no matter who was assigned to write the episode, and honestly no matter who got credit for the episode, he did a pass on every script. Again, that doesn't work either. But
he made a pass on every
He made a pass on every script. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Whatever came out was through his voice. He basically put it through his translator. It feels like John Rogers, like because of his, you know, his collaborative background, his humble background, his tabletop gaming background.
Well, also, no, I mean, he started as a stand-up comedian.
Oh, there you go. So he understands what it's like to not have an audience. Yeah. We do both make a disparaging joke at the same time. You would know better than I. Like, is there a John Rogers voice? As much as like, oh, when I see that name, I know it's generally going to be a fun time.
Well, and I would say that no, I don't think there's there's definitely types of stories he likes to tell.
Sure.
But when I see, you know, I talk about Leverage and the Librarians, and, you know, which Dean Devlin is as much a part of those as John Rogers is. But like, if you go watch the commentaries, he talks about the writers. And so with Leverage Redemption, he even said like, this is not my show. I was only a consultant.
Oh, really?
You need to talk to these people. It's the writers. It's a group of writers. But even then they say it's not just the writers, right? They always say that the actors are important. The cameramen, you know, like he always talks about with the original Leverage that one of the cameramen is the guy that always does what they call, the ninja zoom? The way that they zoom with like on people while everyone's paused. That for at least the original Leverage, that was always one camera guy.
Nice.
Right. And he didn't make the show, but that was an important part of it. You know, Christian Kane was just one of the actors, but he made the character of Elliot, and he also is Christian Kane, to which they even say like that guy is probably Batman. So like I say that because when I watch, you know, listen to commentaries he does on episodes of shows he's done, he always says like, hey, this guy did this and this and this. And it makes me realize, although I talk about him like he's not a tour, because I mean, I love the guy in terms of...
We kind of follow him like as if he were one. You're like, oh, right. John Rogers got this thing coming out. I'm checking it out.
You know, he's always one to say like, this is the team that worked on this. You know, these are the people that wrote this. This is the person. And I think more and more is, I think why I've kind of changed to like, I think Hideo Kojima is a good guy.
It's weird.
And he has some ideas, but I'm now confident that there are people around him that are making his stuff as much as he is.
Right.
But we don't hear about, you know, those people
because it's in Japanese, probably.
Well, and that's actually fair. That may just be one of those things where maybe they talk about the other people. We just don't see them because we're an American audience.
Which leads me back to the Ken Levine thing, because the one thing that's persistent throughout the story is that he's not able to keep a team. The turnover at this Ghost Story Studios or whatever it's called is insane. People leave all the time because, and actually not because of the things that that are normally associated with high turnover at game studios, because
I mean, there's no crunch.
Because there's no crunch, right? Which and that's good. That's good, right? But no, they are making stuff. That's the thing. I could search the article here, but like they make systems and they make demos, and he's on board 1 minute, but the next day is like, no, this isn't what I want, and then he's like, we toss it out, and people get frustrated and bounce.
Right.
Not because it seems like, well, he sounds like he has personality issues too, but not because he's an overbearing, abusive dick, and not because he's making them work, abusive hours. And I think the most important thing we need to mention here is not because they're not getting paid. They are getting paid. Like, it seems like the people working there are getting paid. They're working regular, reasonable hours, but they're just not making a game, which that in itself is one of the biggest sins. Because why do you go into the video game industry? Because you want to make games. And what can you put on your resume even? If you're like, I worked at Ghost Story for 6 years, and I got nothing to show for it.
Well, there's a comment in the article about that where they say that often when you work on games, you can't talk about what you've done.
Right.
You can't put stuff in your portfolio until there's like the first marketing blitz. But there's none here because they're not actually releasing anything. This is all being tossed and started over. So that is frustrating, right? Because video games is inherently a creative art.
Right.
What does it mean to be a creative where you basically either aren't creating or what you're creating is being thrown out?
And what that feels like ultimately is that, and this is me kind of trying to do a hindsight 2020, trying to step back and view it as history rather than as something that I'm living through. It feels like this was a test for Ken Levine. Are you an auteur? And it seems like he's failing because he's not making anything. Because the thing is, auteurs become auteurs because they make stuff. Ultimately, whether it's good or bad, it doesn't matter. Right? Whether it's overbearing or not, it doesn't matter.
What's his name? The Fable guy.
Oh yeah. God, who is that?
Molyneux.
Peter Molyneux. Yeah.
Right. Like, he makes stuff.
Yeah.
I don't think anything's been good since like the 90s, or at least the 2000s.
Honestly, like, as a creator, the situation that Ken Levine is living through sounds like a nightmare. Why not go back to, like, if anything, he should quit the team and go back and like work for a big studio, like go work for EA or something like that, and like just become a cog in the machine again to figure out what the hell it is you want to do. But I know Ken Levine was dabbling in, because Bioshock was getting adapted into a feature film, and I think he was on board as a screenwriter or something like that for a while. That wasn't talked about in the article, but they do talk about how, like, he got into writing.
He'd been like a screenwriter,
right? Or at least had,
or he wanted
intentions to be,
right.
Yeah. And so I feel like he is trapped in this liminal space of like, I don't know where to go next. And the problem is that he's getting a blank check from Take-Two Interactive, who are the owners and they have money to spend. They're the owners of Rockstar Games, which make the Grand Theft Auto series, specifically
and a lot of other stuff too.
But let's be honest, it's Grand Theft Auto Online and Red Dead Redemption, stuff like that. But like, Grand Theft Auto is the...
Well, I think they also own Firaxis, don't they?
Right. But that's not generating the money that Grand Theft Auto Online is generating. I don't know if you've seen the numbers on that. Despite being like a 10-year-old game at this point, it is bringing in money.
Oh, okay. I mean, I feel like that they have, but like,
yes, but they have a lot of properties, indeed. Yes.
I mean, and so like they have, one thing I will say is that they have many vectors that even if Grand Theft Auto Online blew up tomorrow, they still have other things that they could mine for profit.
Sure.
I mean, XCOM.
Right. I was just saying that they have what seems to be right now and has been for the last X number of years, that since its inception, just infinity revenue coming in. And so they have the literally the cash to waste on Ken Levine.
Burn, I believe, is
that too.
The verb we should.
Well, you got to put it in the waste bin before you burn it. There we go.
Or do you?
Right. I guess we should say that this game, since the studio has been founded, it's been 7.5 years, almost 8 years since it's been founded, and no game, right? I don't know if we actually laid out the actual number there. And he does take a long time between games, 5 years between the two Bioshocks, for example. That's a long time for a game, and a long time for this industry, because not speaking of the PC side, but like, that's a console generation. and that's not necessarily the most viable thing to keep a career going. But we'll see.
And there's a lot there. Neither of us are in this industry. And actually, I think the one thing I do want to reiterate is that it does feel like, because they talk about how like, oh, there's some other good people that he brought along and then they quit.
Right.
And it's like, maybe this is just that situation where, I want to emphasize, and I say this is like a leadership thing. As someone who, pretended to be a leader for 7 years of his life, like the team is the thing. And actually, I want to see the video game auteur that we recognize, or the film and TV auteur, where they say like, you know what they did good? They put together a team. They knew who to find, who to bring together to make this. Because we have this obsession with the one, like the one person being the ultimate creative, and it's like that's. Outside of something like Stardew Valley, where that guy did all of it himself over the course of 4 years.
We call him the Dan Bethel of video games, honestly.
But like also, that's Stardew Valley is a great game, but also it is not, it's a really rugged Harvest Moon, right? Like he did a lot of work there and it's good, but it is not this great, no one's going to write narrative discussions about the story of Harvest Moon,
sure,
maybe
historical discussions, but the only person that comes to mind, and he's a company man, but like maybe Shigeru Miyamoto at Nintendo, but he's built into a team anyway, Well,
and also, I mean, I feel like you probably find out that he actually has a lot of team around him. Because that's the thing, is like those, like a lot of, and I know in Japan, when you look at a lot of those stories, they had teams, right? Like they were all working together. And like when we talk about Final Fantasy, we don't talk about one person. When we talk about some of these games, we don't talk about one. I mean, even Miyamoto, like we talk about Koji Kondo. We talk about some of these other guys. Like we realize that it wasn't just one person just having infinite inspiration out of his asshole.
Right. Like who's the ostensible Mega Man guy?
Fuck, I don't even know anymore. Like that's a good example. There's the one guy that made the game. What was it?
Mighty Number 9.
Mighty Number 9, and we found out like he wasn't even like the guy. He was just one of the guys.
Well, yeah. Actually, I not to bring up a previous Week in Geek, I did read the Mega Man 3 boss fight books. I have to be honest. I only read a third of it. I skipped all the shit where he's talking about biography stuff, because it was a really bad book. But the history stuff actually talks a lot about the team they assembled when the actual original creator of Mega Man decided to bounce after 2, and the guy that you're talking about, whose name I can't remember. This is terrible. Became the Mega Man guy. But even then, it's still about the teams that they created around him, because as is illustrated, like he went off as like, I'm the Mega Man guy. I want to make my own Mega Man game, not saddled by the baggage of Capcom. And it was hot garbage.
Right.
I guess the question that kind of comes out of this is like, we talk about auteurs. We have talked about auteurs and how they are in every medium at this point. And this may be a stupid question to ask, because it's answerable, and it's on a case-by-case basis, but like, do you feel that auteurship in video games is especially difficult or needed? Because video games, especially now, especially AAA video games, have to involve huge teams. Like, is the act of elevating creators of video games to auteur level, is it helping anything, I guess?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
And the example I'm gonna say is actually Sid Meier.
Oh yeah.
Because he's
or John Madden, honestly, in that regard.
Sid Meier's, his name's on the tin, right? Mm-hmm. Except he's not, since the original Civil. And I'm not saying Sid Meier's a bad person. What I'm saying is that he's like, his name is on these games. Sid Meier's Civilization, Sid Meier's Railroads. But, with Civilization, I don't think he's been like directly like the guy in charge since the first one. Like they've actually, since I think 2 was Brian Reynolds, I think 6 is Ed Beach, right? Like they have people that are like the producer, and they talk to Sid Sure.
Yeah. Hey, we're making another game.
You know, he's not the guy in charge, and no one would ever say like, "Oh, Sid Meier made this." Like, no, a big old ass team made this. You know, so I don't think the auteur is necessary. I think there's a way to have someone involved that has like a legacy of like a design legacy. You know, I actually think about Star Trek with Gene Roddenberry, and when he kind of got sidelined in a lot of things. You know, I think of the movies after the first movie, Star Trek 2, other people made those movies, but they would go to him and say like, "Hey, Gene, this is what we're doing." You know, or I think about Star Wars with the Clone Wars, where George would show up for a meeting, sit for 5 minutes, throw out ideas, and then leave. You know, and some of those ideas would become important and valuable. But some would be like, George, you know, like, no thanks. And they would make their show. So I think there's a place for guys like Hideo Kojima and Sid Meier, at least, you know, and maybe Ken Levine, although maybe not, where it's like consulting producer or guy who shows up for 10 minutes at every production meeting and throws some ideas out.
I mean, Tom Clancy's been dead for nearly a decade, but he gets his name slapped on the fronts of video games even through to today. So I know for a fact, and maybe I'm off base for this, I know for a fact they're not consulting him anymore. But that's the thing. I mean, here it is. We got Sid Meier presents Tom Clancy's as John Madden's NFL 2022. RIP John Madden, I guess.
There's a place for respecting you know, creator, right, or a creative. I think what we see with Ken Levine, and maybe like reflects in others, is that sometimes they need a team, and in fact they always do.
I will say in the AAA space of video games, I know you're much more in tune with like the indie scene, as am I. But like, since I play on consoles, I pay attention to the big AAA games as well. A lot of the younger creators that are maybe the game directors and stuff like that, I'm thinking of people like the most recent God of War game. The head of that was Cody Barlog. I think of Neil Druckmann, I believe, who was behind Last of Us. I think of lots of people in that ilk, right, who are names, but they are kind of like going the John Rogers route, where they're not allowing culture to elevate them, at least not yet, to that like deified status of like, you are geniuses, and we bow as we wait for your next game. And they're much more, when you read their interviews, when you hear them talk about their games, they're talking about their teams. Personally, that seems like a much healthier way to go, and it's better for the industry, for the developers, and for the gamers as well. We talked weeks ago about, I read this in that bad Mega Man book as well, but it's all over the internet. But it's not good. A lot during the NES and Super NES era, a lot of Japanese developers, not Nintendo not included, were forced their staff to use pseudonyms in the game's credits to avoid being headhunted by other studios. I'm guessing by Nintendo, honestly, which intentionally obscured the team, despite the fact that they all ostensibly had names there. They just weren't their actual names.
They ostensibly had names.
Yeah, right. So
Toyota was
right, Akiman. So we've come a long way, but I still think we have some distance to run. And that, I think, part of that is as a culture, and I think we're kind of learning this, to not put people on a pedestal, especially for video games, especially for AAA video games with these huge budgets. Like, this is a team that makes these things happen. And Ken Levine, release a game. Just do it, man. Just make a game. Who cares if it's bad?
What do they say? You know, shit or get off the pot, I believe, is the classic phrase.
But when you're sitting on a gold toilet, my friend.
Right,
a heated gold toilet with a warm water bidet,
and that's a whole discussion there about problems with the system.
I mean, people call us the auteurs of podcasts, but we don't let it get to our head.
No one calls us that.
I really want to shout out my team, Invisible Editor. Anyway,
they're the best.
They are the best. They keep us in line, and it's really our team that I want to thank right now. Andrew, thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Hey, no problem. So if you, dear listeners, have any thoughts about the topics we discussed this week, feel free to leave your thoughts as comments on the page for this episode at forallintents.net.
You can also post your comments or engage in conversations with other listeners on our Facebook page.
You can find us on other social media, such as Twitter. We can find us at respective handles. On Twitter, you can find Andrew at ProfoundDark. You can find me at dbethel. You can also find us on Instagram. You can find Andrew at ProfoundBrick and me and my work at dbethelcomics.
While you're on our website at forallintents.net, you can check out our YouTube page, which you can find by clicking on the link in the corner that says YouTube.
We use 2 tracks of music for our show. One is called Disco Medusae, the other is called District 4, and they're both written and performed by Kevin McLeod of the Clan McLeod, immortal swordsman, graph paper enthusiast, and musician extraordinaire.
You can find his music at incompetech.filmmusic.io, and that's all licensed under the Creative Commons 4.0 by attribution license.
If you like the show and like to help us out, the best way to do so would be to subscribe to the show using whichever podcasting service you happen to use, whether it's something like the Apple Podcast app or Spotify. What would help us out most, though, would be to go to the storefront leaving some sort of review, whether a text review or using their proprietary metric will help spread the word to new potential listeners through the magic of algorithms.
So, all right, this was a rough week last week.
It was. I'm glad that you're healthy and safe, though, Andrew. As I'm sure.
I mean, we need to acknowledge the real tragedy. America's patron saint, one of America's patron saints, Betty White.
Oh, yes.
Finally, I say finally, like
finally,
a week, 2 weeks before her 100th birthday, Betty White passed away.
Indeed, a loss. But we got 99 years out of this wonderful human being.
No, it is, and it's just one of those things where I mean I laugh at all the idea that they were planning her 100th birthday celebration as like a big event, and now it's like whoop!
Right? You see 100th? The People magazine cover that was going around.
Oh no!
Oh yeah, it was like the best troll on Betty White's part. She was like, "Fuck you," but yeah, she is wonderful. She was wonderful. Got to learn how to say that.
Yeah.
Was actually a very progressive entertainer, a champion for the unacknowledged and the underrepresented, and also just an amazing sense of humor all the way through to the end. I think obviously The Golden Girls is a standout. Andrew and I bonded not over her performance, but her performance was part of it. Watching Boston Legal, where she was great.
But she really, I mean, she like really did some great stuff in our lifetime. Not even to mention what she did before that.
In the 50s and whatnot. Yeah. So rest in peace, Betty White. You, more than most people that have crossed our culture, deserve it. And you will be missed. But what a life. What a life. And I think this is not an original sentiment, but it is kind of one of the things that was going around after she had her death had been announced, is that at least she knew how beloved she was before she died. Right. Like, there's no doubt the world, at least America, but the world, no doubt, loved Betty White, and she knew it through and through. So,
well, and that's, I guess, what better way to die than planning your 100th birthday celebration that will be broadcast to millions. I just want to acknowledge her because she's kind of she's touched a lot of media, including some nerdy stuff, but mostly just being a force for things that are good,
right?
And being funny,
indeed,
and kind of teaching us, like, when you're like a certain amount of, like, don't give a shit what other people think, just do what you want to, do what you think is right.
Yep, absolutely, yeah. So until you learn to not give a shit, dear listeners, I'm D. Bethel.
And I'm Andrew Asplund.
And for all intents and purposes,
thank you for being... No, wait. That was a podcast.
I wrote a check yesterday.
Did you really?
For fun. I mean, you don't have to hit record if you don't want to. It's all a voluntary process.
I'm recording then.
This is a podcast made by volunteers.
It is. I don't know where dwarves or Scottish came from.
Do you have a monthly meeting with your unprofessional staff? Because don't be an elitist, Andrew. I told you what my dad says, right?
What?
He says the reason why it's good to talk to yourself is because you always know there's an intelligent person talking, and you always know there's an intelligent person listening.
You're nervous, yeah. Well, I mean, I don't fuck with blood stuff now. Ever since I fucking passed out.
You don't do blood play?
Well, not since my last blood draw.
Blood play. That's the new Rob Liefeld character.
Oof. God. That sounds real.
And when you threw a party, I don't ever want knew you would see the biggest gift away from me, and kind of bitch would see.
I mean, for years I thought it said the heart attacks would say, "Thank you for being a friend." I'm like, that's an awful song.
Damn, that is cold as ice.
And the heart attacks would say, "Thank you for being a friend."
All of them are together now in whatever afterlife exists. Good for them.